بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين سيدنا ونبينا ومولانا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. والأمر الثاني أن الراوي قد يكون مقلا من الحديث فلا يكثر الأخذ عنه، وقد صنفوا فيه الوحدانة وهو من لم يروي عنه إلا واحد ولو سميه، فممن جمعه مسلم والحسن بن سفيان وغيرهما. أو لا يسمى الراوي اختصارا من الراوي عنه كقوله أخبرني فلان أو شيخ أو رجل أو بعضهم أو ابن فلان، ويستدل على معرفة اسم المبهم بوروده من طريق أخرى مسمى وصنفوا فيه المبهمات. So they say that you can believe in good luck, so good omen rather. So we read till there so that hopefully we can reach till there inshallah. Ibn Hajar rahmallah mentions initially when starting this eighth category that wasababuha amran. There are two ways in which a rawi can be unknown. So there are two factors. So the first way is that people refer to him in a way that he is not popularly known as. Now Ibn Hajar rahmallah mentions the second method, and he says that the narrator narrates a little. So if a person remains unknown because he hardly ever narrated, and because he hardly ever narrated, obviously there will be very few students from him. Hardly anyone would narrate from him, because how can anyone narrate from him if he did not narrate? So here he says, أن الراوي قد يكون مقلا من الحديث. So this words قد يكون مقلا من الحديث is اتفاقي. It's just generally what happens. That generally a person has few students because he hardly narrates. The more he narrates, the more students he would have. And that is why you find that there will even be weak narrators, or even there would be people who are known to be kadhab, yet they will have students. You will find experts of hadith, they themselves have graded a person as weak, yet they narrate from him. So the main reason why a person would have few students is because he hardly narrates. But we will explain shortly, inshallah, that this here is just mentioned in passing. So he says, فَلَا يَكْثُرُ الْأَخْذُ عَنْهُ. Now this is the apparent way to read it. You can say, see Sheikh Nuruddin Itr also put a fatha there under Hamza, that فَلَا يَكْثُرُ الْأَخْذُ عَنْهُ. That this is how you most probably would read it the minute you see the stem. And Mullah Ali Qari rahmallah, he also explained it, أَخْذُ الْحَدِيثِ عَنْهُ. However, technically, it's actually better to read it as فَلَا يَكْثُرُ الْآخِذُ عَنْهُ, and therefore you will see in some prints they put a mad there so that you read it as آخِذُ, because a person can get many ahadith. Maybe he can go and he can sit with many shuyukh, he can study a lot, but still there would just be maybe a few. Maybe it was just in his nasib, it was just in his taqdir. Maybe he lived in an offshore place, maybe in a rural area, there were hardly anyone there. So in spite of him going and studying so much, or maybe a person, different people have different nature. A person, maybe it's just his nature that he would not narrate. So he would go and sit with a lot of shuyukh, and he would not narrate. So this is what Allama Munawi rahmallah says. He said, اعترض بأنه كان ينبغي أن يقول الآخذون إذ لا يلزم من كثرة الآخذ من كثرة الأخذ كثرة الآخذين. And then he says والاعتبار في الجهالة وعدمها بالآخذين وبقوله لا يخفى ما بين قولين فلا يكثر الأخذ عنه وبين قوله. So yeah, it means that he did not have many students, and the students could be conveyed from the word akhid rather than the word akh. So Mullah Ali Qari rahimahullah mentions that here he is referring to majhulud dhat. If you see on page 508, he says an rawi fayasiru majhulud dhat. However, if you look at the bottom of the next page on page 101, and if you don't have the same print like me, if you go about 6 paragraphs ahead, you will find that Ibn Hajar rahimahullah says there ahead, he says فَإِن سُمِّيَ الرَّاوِي وَانْفَرَدَ رَاوٍ وَاحِدٌ بِالرِّوَايَةِ عَنْهُ فَهُوَ مَجْهُولُ الْعَيْنِ. So he's saying that we refer to him as مَجْهُولُ الْعَيْنِ, and this is the correct terminology in the books of usul, that is referred to مَجْهُولُ الْعَيْنِ. Now to understand what Ibn Hajar rahimahullah actually means in these few lines, in this paragraph, what does he mean, who is he referring to? we go and we look at how Allama al-Khatib rahmallah phrased it. So in Al-Kifaya, Allama al-Khatib rahmallah, he phrased it this year, and he said, al-majhulu, meaning majhulu al-ain, المجهول عند أصحاب الحديث هو كل من لم يشتهر بالطلب العلم في نفسه. This here is the crucial point why I'm quoting from Al-Kifaya. That it is a person who is not popularly known to be a student of hadith. So we just discussed it yesterday in the lesson of Muqaddamah ibn Salah, that earlier scholars before the 3rd century, they would refer to him as Sheikh. In their terminology, they would refer to him as Sheikh. So if a person is not popularly known, maybe he's in another profession, and maybe he has a business or something. So he's not, people doesn't know that he is a person who generally studies hadith. So he is known as majhul. Maybe he could be popular in other things. Maybe he could even be popular for his ibadah, but he's not popular as a student of hadith. So this is what Allama Khatib rahmallah explains. So he says, وَلَا عَرَفَهُ الْعُلَمَاء بِهِ. Ulama even don't know that he was a student of hadith. وَمَنْ لَمْ يُعْرَفْ حَدِيثُهُ إِلَّا مِنْ جِهَةِ رَاوٍ وَاحِدٍ. And with that, so you can see he first mentioned that he's not popularly known. With that, there's only one student who is narrating from him. Thereafter, he gives Amr di Murrin and Jabbar al-Ta'i and Abdullah ibn Aghar al-Amdani, etc. So because he narrated a little, hardly anyone narrated from him. So even if his name is taken, and therefore you can see that Ibn Hajar rahmallah is saying that وَلَوْ سُمِّيَ, even if he is taken, it's just like a random name which is taken, and no one will actually be able to know his identity because of his name. So whether you take his name or don't take his name, it makes no difference. So therefore in this first paragraph here, al-amru thani anna rawi qad yakunu muqillan, this is, you can say, like a point A. And then the next paragraph will be a point B. So the first scenario is that the name is taken, and the second scenario is that even the name is not taken. Although the ruling will be the same, but he mentioned it separately. So this is the explanation which I am giving and linking it with what Allama Khatib rahimahullah is mentioned in Al-Kifaya. But if you have to look, Allama Laqani rahimahullah in Qada al-Watr, he tried to create a distinction between this paragraph here and between where I directed to you, the last line of the next page, 6 paragraphs ahead. فَإِن سُمِّيَ الرَّاوِي وَانْفَرَدَ رَاوٍ وَاحِدٌ بِالرِّوَايَةِ عَنْهُ فَهُوَ مَجْهُولُ الْعَيْنِ. So he tries to create a distinction. He intends that he understands that Ibn Hajar rahmallah is here talking about something else. And thereafter, when he comes to that, then he's going to be talking of majhulul ayn. So that contradicts what I mentioned. So he is saying that no, this here is actually referring to someone who is known to be a student of hadith. So here Ibn Hajar is talking about someone who is known to be a student of hadith, and there 6 paragraphs ahead, the last line of the next page, that is where Ibn Hajar rahmallah is discussing someone who is not known to be a student of hadith. So that contradicts what I just told you. So Allama Laqani says يجب أن يقيد هذا النوع بأن يكون المروي عنه مشهورا بالحديث والعلم. And I quoted you from Allama al-Khatib rahmallah that this here is refers to Man lam yashtahir, and he is saying that it refers to someone who is known. So he's saying that يجب أن يقيد هذا النوع بأن يكون المروي عنه مشهورا بالحديث والعلم لكنه لم يروي عنه إلا واحد فغاير مجهول العين. So he is saying that this here is talking about, it's totally different compared to مجهول العين. إذ يعتبر فيه ألا يكون المجهول معروفا بالعلم. He even tries to interpret the words of Ibn Hajar rahimahullah to say that you can understand it from the words of Ibn Hajar rahimahullah. And thereafter he says, فَتَمَيَّزَ الْآحَادِ عَنِ الْمَجْهُولِ الْعَيْنِ بِالشُّهْرَةِ. So basically what he is saying, that here Ibn Hajar rahimahullah is talking about ahad, or if you want to call it, you can call it wuhdan. So he's talking about wuhdan. Then in the next paragraph, he'll be talking about ibham. Thereafter, he will be talking about ta'dil ala al-ibham, and then only he will be talking of majhul al-ain. So he understands it that Ibn Hajar rahmallah is talking about one thing. Thereafter, he's going to move on to another discussion. Then he's going to discuss something else. And after that, he will discuss a completely different term, majhul al-ain. However, like I told you, that I humbly understand that Ibn Hajar rahimahullah is discussing majhul al-ain, yeah. Thereafter he discusses mubham. Then he discusses ta'dil al-ibham. And thereafter he reverts back to majhul al-ain. So he's discussing something, then discussing something else, then going on to another topic, and then coming back to what he's mentioning here in this paragraph. So what would make me think that this explanation of Allāmah al-Laqani rahmallah is not precise? Remember in the last lesson we said وَذَلِكَ حَقُّ الْعَالِمْ عَلَى الْمُتَعَلِّمْ وَوَاجِبٌ عَلَى التَّالِي لِلْمُتَقَدِّمِ. So if you understand it to be different, so we mentioned it. So what I've done is I looked here at the books which Ibn Hajar rahmallah is referring us to. The books which he's giving is reference. So he's mentioned that وَقَدْ صَنَّفُوا فِيهِ الْوَحْدَانِ, and thereafter he mentions فَمِمَّنْ جَمَعَهُ مُسْلِمٌ. So he's mentioning that Imam Muslim rahmallah is amongst those who gathered the names of these type of narrators. So now to correctly understand what Ibn Hajar rahmallah meant, the ideal would have been if you could have asked him, but now he's no more here. So to understand what he means by this paragraph, we have to look at what he is referring us to. Because obviously, if he's telling us that Imam Muslim rahmallah wrote about this, you can't be talking about vegetables and then reference a person to a book on meat. You have to reference them or refer them to a book which you are talking about. So here he is referring us to the book of Wahdan. When we go to this book of Imam Muslim rahmallah, we'll discuss more about the book of Imam Muslim shortly. We find that the exact same names which Allāmah Khatib rahmallah mentioned is those who are not popularly known as being in the field of Hadith. Those are the exact same names which Imam Muslim rahmallah mentions in the same book. So by way of example, Allāmah Khatib rahmallah took the name of Qais ibn Kurkum. So you will find in this book the name of Imam Muslim al-Munfaridat wal-Wahdan on page 134. Imam Muslim rahmallah mentioned the name of Qais ibn Kurkum. Likewise, Allāmah Khatib rahmallah took the name of Jabbar al-Ta'i. So this is the correct way to determine the intent of Ibn Hajar, to check the books which he is referring us to. So this is how I understood it, that here he's talking of Majhul al-Ain, then discussing other things, and thereafter he will discuss Majhul al-Ain again. If this understanding is not is correct, then you can follow it. If it's not correct, then you can follow what Allāmah al-Laqani rahmallah is mentioned. Inshallah, one day when we go to Jannah, then we will ask Ibn Hajar rahmallah exactly what he meant. And so you know how Allāmah Khatib rahmallah said that you should not look at this as like an isolated ta'aqqub. Rather, you must look that he wrote a whole book on the virtues and the manaqib of Imam Bukhari rahimahullah. So in the same way, you don't look at this one place where we differ with Allāmah al-Laqani. You look at all the hundreds of other places where we quoted him. So this here is a wahdan, where you get this kind of narrators where you have only one person who is narrating from them. So Allāmah Ibn Hajar rahmallah said, وَقَدْ صَنَّفُوا فِيهِ الْوَحْدَانِ. The scholars would write on this. And why they would write on this? So that you could come to know about them. Like Allāmah al-Laqani says, وَمِنْ فَوَائِدِ مَعْرِفَةِ هَذَا الْفَنِّ مَعْرِفَةُ الْمَجْهُولِ إِذَا لَمْ يَكُنْ صَحَابِيًا. That if a narrator is unknown, if he's a Sahabi, it is fine. But if he's not a Sahabi, then you need to know that he is unknown. So that when you see his name in the tariq, in the chain of transmission, then you would know. So here he's saying that وَقَدْ صَنَّفُوا فِيهِ الْوَحْدَانِ. So Allāmah Qurani rahmallah, he explained وَالْمُرَادُ مِنَ الْوَحْدَانِ الْمُؤَلَّفَاتِ الَّتِي فِي شَأْنِ الْمُقِلْ مِنَ الْحَدِيثِ. That you get these kind of books. Now, after mentioning that scholars wrote about it, he again explains the term, and he says وَهُوَ مَنْ لَمْ يَرْوِ عَنْهُ إِلَّا وَاحِدْ وَلَوْ سُمِّيَ. So just one line on top, he said أَنَّ الرَّاوِي قَدْ يَكُونُ مُقِلًّا مِنَ الْحَدِيثِ. That the meaning of or the reason why a person is unknown is because he narrated just a little. And here he is now saying that it refers to someone who only has one. He's saying that only one person narrates from him. So what could happen is that a person could narrate a little, but she could have lots of students. On the other hand, a person could narrate a lot, but he only have few students. So then this here would not tie up with what he mentioned one line above. And therefore, there is basically umum wa khusus min wajhin. Like Mullah al-Qari rahmallah said that وإن كان بينهما عموم من وجه بحسب الظاهر لاجتماعهما فيما كان حديث الراوي لم يروي عنه إلا واحد. That you have a person who only heard one hadith. So he went to the masjid, he heard the sheikh saying one hadith, he came back and he told it to one person. So in this case, they both equal, both are the same. That the person heard this one narration and he only heard one person who narrated from him. So this fits with both statements. But then, what if he only heard that one narration, but now he went and he was invited to a huge gathering. There were thousands and thousands, tens of thousands of students there. So he only heard one hadith, but now he narrates this here to that great group of muhaddithun. And that great group of muhaddithin, they say, mashallah, this was the guest speaker to such an important event. So therefore, they all go and narrate it. So here he has many students. He has hundreds of students. But he only heard this one narration. Or you can get the third scenario. And the third scenario is where he heard hundreds and hundreds of hadith. But you should just go and listen to hadith. You as a person who would not talk a lot, you would not say lots. So maybe only one person heard to him one day in passing. He told one person, so he only has one person. So therefore we explained that that's what قد يكون مقلا من الحديث. It is just a جملة اتفاقي لأن إقلال الحديث يعد سببا للجهالة. وهي إنما تحصل بتفرد الراوي سواء كثر الحديث أم لا. So this here is basically very specifically referring to the amount of students and not to the amount of narrations. So it's immaterial how many narrations the person narrated. You have to look at the amount of students of the narrator, and that is how it is considered as majhulul ayn. So majhulul ayn is هو الراوي الذي ذكر اسمه وعرفت ذاته لكنه مقل في الحديث فلا يكثر الأخذ عنه ولم يروي عنه إلا راو واحد. So now Ibn Hajar rahmallah mentions those who gathered the names of this kind of narrators who only had one student. So he explains that the first person is Imam Muslim, and I told you that we refer to his kitab. Imam Bukhari rahmallah also wrote, but his was on Sahaba, so Asamir Sahaba al-Wuhdan. But since this year is the chapter of Ta'an al-Rawi, therefore there's no need to mention the books on those Sahaba who only had one narrator from them. So therefore Ibn Hajar rahmallah did not mention the book of Imam Bukhari rahmallah. Rather he started with this book of Imam Muslim rahmallah. So this book, like I told you, the name of it is Al-Munfaridat wal-Wuhdan. Ibn Hajar rahmallah in his books when he's doing talking about Rijal, he very, very frequently refers to this book. But always when he refers to this book, he only refers to it as Al-Wuhdan. He doesn't refer to the full name, Al-Munfaridat wal-Wuhdan. But the correct name is Al-Munfaridat wal-Wuhdan. So this book here, it was initially published in India, and thereafter it was printed with the tahqiq of Abdul Ghaffar Sulaiman al-Baghdadi, and it was published by Dar al-Kutub al-Ilmiya. It's in about by Al-Faruq al-Hadithiyya. This print of Al-Faruq al-Hadithiyya, it also has a book of Imam Nasa'i rahmallah on the same topic, Tasmiyatu man lam yarwi anhu ghayru rajulin wahidin. That's the name which Allama Nasa'i rahmallah wrote. So that's the first book. The second book which he mentions is the book of Hasan ibn Sufyan. So Hasan ibn Sufyan al-Shaybani, he was a great muhaddith of Khurasan at that time. He passed away in the year 303 Hijri. So he also wrote the book Al-Wuhdan. So I don't know anything about this book. If you come to know anything about this book, you can let me know. Probably it must be Mafqud. So I don't know the name of it or whether it's published or anything about it. And thereafter he says, وَغَيْرُهُمَا. There were many others who wrote. So like Abu Zur'a al-Razi, he also wrote. And then I just told you now that Imam Nasa'i rahmallah, he wrote Tasmiyatu man lam yarwi anhu ghayr rajulin wahid. Likewise, you get Al-Ahad wal-Mathani of Ibn Abi Asim. That's also printed. It's printed in 6 volumes. And then around 80 years ago, Sheikh Mu'allimi, he wrote his book on Al-Wuhdan. So the benefit of this book, the name of the book is also Al-Wuhdan. the benefit of this is that it's not just a list of names. So like if you go to Imam Muslim's book, it's just a list of names. So it's name, the next name, the next name, like that. It's just a list of names. Nothing about, yes, here and there, Imam Muslim rahmallah makes a comment, but generally it's just a book of names. So this book here of Sheikh Muallimi, it gives much more insight to the narrator. So like we said, that these are books which you have to read so that it could help you to identify this kind of narrators. Allama Munawi rahmallah said, وَمِنْ فَوَائِدِهِ مَعْرِفَةُ الْمَجْهُولِ إِذَا لَمْ يَكُنْ صَحَابِيًا فَلَا يُقْبَلْ. And then he gives a whole lot of examples. From the examples which he gives, he also gives us Jabbar al-Ta'i, who Imam Muslim rahmallah is mentioned, and therefore I told you this refers to Majhulul Ain. Ibn Hajar rahmallah now moves on to discuss about a narrator whose name is not taken. So here you can see the name is taken, Jabbar al-Ta'i, so now you know it. But it's just that, it's just a name. It's the people of that time, they couldn't picture a person with this name. They didn't know who this person was. So it's just a name floating around. They didn't know who exactly it was. Now you can get a second scenario. So this is what we are saying, that it's a second scenario of the second type. You heard Ibn Hajar rahmallah said al-jahala, this 8th type of ta'an al-rawi, wa sababuha amran. There are two ways. So the first is an-rawi qad takthuru nu'utuhu. Then the second is that an-rawi qad yakunu muqillan min al-hadith walau summiya. And now this here is a point B. So it does not contradict his initial statement of saying wasababuha amran. He's not talking here of a third type. It's a point B of the second type. Why? Because if you have to just look at the ibara, you might think that this here is now a third way in which you can get, in which a rawi is not known. So the first one is referred to by various different names and titles, which is not even known of. The second is that he only has one student. And now the third is here where they don't take the name of the person. They just say a person told me or an individual told me. So it could, a person could assume, in fact, Mullah al-Qari rahmallah mentioned, وَحَاصِلُ مَا تَقْتَضِي عِبَارَةُ الشَّرْحِ وَالْمَتْنِ أَن تَكُونَ مُوجِبَاتُ الْجَهَالَةِ أَرْبَعَةً لَا إِثْنَانِ. So Ibn Hajar mentioned that it's divided into two categories. If you don't look carefully, you might think that Ibn Hajar is talking of 4 categories. So the first category will be that kathratun nu'ut, he's given different titles, lots of different names. The second one is al-iqlal, which leads to having few narrators. The third is adamu tasmiyah, but it's not like that. Rather, this here is directly linked to the previous paragraph. It is a point B of Amr Thani. So we started the paragraph today. Well, Amr Thani, anna rawi qad yakunu muqilla. Now we're discussing point B. And you have to look in Nukhbat al-Fikr, this is how it is mentioned. وَقَدْ يَكُونُ مُقِلًّا فَلَا يَكْسُرُ الْأَخْذُ عَنْهُ وَصَنَّفُوا فِيهِ الْوُحْدَانُ وَهُوَ مَنْ لَمْ يَرْوِ عَنْهُ إِلَّا وَاحِدٌ وَلَا يُسَمَّى اخْتِصَارًا. So this is what Allama al-Qani rahmallah has also pointed out here. And he said, الظاهر بحسب المتن قبل وجود الشرح. That you must remember, Ibn Hajar rahmallah wrote the Matan Nukhbat al-Fikr before he wrote this commentary. And when he wrote that, you could already detect from there that it's not a third type. So he's saying أنه عطف على قوله فلا يكثر الأخذ عنه فهو قسم له وكلاهما قسم من كون الراوي مقلا وهو so he's saying that وهو القسم الثاني من سبب الجهالة. So this is basically a point B of the second type. So when understanding the text like this here, then you can see all the statements of Ibn Hajar rahmallah fitting to one another, and they all make a sense. So he's saying, أو لا يسمى الراوي اختصارا من الراوي عنه, that the name of a rawi is not even taken. Why? It's just because they wanted to make ikhtisar. So his student didn't take the name. He just said a person told me or an individual told me. So that, like you can see, Ibn Hajar is giving examples. He says, like he will say, أخبرني فلان, so and so told me. Or أخبرني شيخ, or أخبرني رجل, حدثني رجل, or بعضهم. Or Ibn Fulan, like this here, he doesn't even mention a name. So in the previous paragraph, he mentions a name, but we cannot put that name, we cannot put any face to that name. We do not know the identity. Here, he doesn't even take the name. So now the question might arise that why would a person do this? Why would he just say, حدثني رجل, if he knows that his students are now not going to accept that narration? So why would he still say it? Because obviously they knew that the asanid are going to be inspected. My students are going to quote the sanad from me. They're going to take my name and they're going to say I said an rajulin, and then they're going to quote my sheikh's name, and because of that they're going to grade the sanad as weak. So they knew that. So why did they still mention an rajulin or an sheikhin? So generally, when you go through asanid, you will find that it was due many times because of the political unrest and the controversies of that time. So when you have to study basically the history of those eras, you find that the leaders were Muslims and then they held onto certain views, and because of that they opposed a few ulama. And now if you're going to take that alim's name, then people might affiliate you with that, and then it will become a problem. So because of that, they would then just say an rajulin. So in this way, at least the hadith could still be transmitted and they won't get into problems. So it's very important also to understand the whole political and social climate, and that played a big role in how the narrators would quote a hadith. So he says, وَصَنَّفُوا فِيهِ. He mentions that with regards to the siyah, okay, firstly, how would you come to know the name of this person? So he's saying that the name, you will first have to look if there is a different sanad. Now that other sanad, it's important that that sanad has to also be an authentic sanad. So if you have another authentic sanad, maybe another person and he's taking the name, or maybe some other student, maybe this person narrated it one time. So he was maybe, just for example, say maybe he was in Baghdad and he didn't want to take the sheikh's name in Baghdad. So the audience in Baghdad, he just told them an rajulin. But then after he went to Khurasan and now he was no more in danger, so now you could freely take the name. Like Sudais, when he came to South Africa, then he made dua for the Taliban. But when he's in Saudi, he'll never ever make dua for the Taliban. So like that, because of the politics of an area, maybe in that particular area you don't take a person's name because you know of his opponents and you don't want to get yourself in a problem. So like that, maybe other students would narrate the hadith from him and they would take the name. So that's how you would come to know of the name. But if you can't find the name, then obviously that whole matan loses its value and it becomes weak. He said, وَصَنَّفُوا فِيهِ الْمُبَهَمَاتِ. So scholars wrote with regards to this, في من أبهم, like how Al-Maqasim Qutl mentioned, they wrote about in this field. So Alama Munawi rahmallah says, وَهِيَ كَثِيرَةٌ جِدًّا. There are lots of books written on this here. Besides just being a lot, it is actually experts who wrote on this field, and therefore you find Mullah al-Qari mentions, وَهُوَ فَنٌ جَلِيلٌ أَلَّفَ فِيهِ غَيْرُ وَاحِدٍ مِنَ الْحُفَّاظِ. That many huffaz wrote on it. Probably the very first person to write was Abdul Ghani ibn Sa'id al-Azdi. He passed away in the year 409. Thereafter, Alama Khatib rahmallah, he wrote, Al-Asma' al-Mubhama fil Anba' al-Muhkama. Thereafter, now going into the next century, Abu al-Fazl ibn Tahir, he wrote Idah al-Ishkal. So I hope when I give you all of these overviews, it creates a different outlook when you go to a library. That's the whole reason why I mention all these books, so that when you go into a library, you can understand. It makes you appreciate books. I remember in the very beginning, I told you that to change your whole mindset. So that is why I mentioned all these books. And also the reason for mentioning prints is so that you can, when buying a book, when referring to a book also, you can take note of the prints of the book. It's so important. And likewise, after that, Khalaf ibn al-Bushkawal, he wrote Al-Ghawamid wal-Mubhamat. So Mullah al-Qari rahmallah remarked about that book of his. He says, وَكِتَابُ أَبِي الْقَاسِمِ ibn Bushkawal أَجْمَعْ مُصَنَّفْ فِيهِ. It gathered the most. So this here is printed by Darul Andalus. It's printed with the tahqiq of Mahmoud al-Maghrawi. Another book which Ibn Bushkawal wrote is Ghawamid al-Asma' al-Mubhama al-Waqi' fi Mutun al-Ahadith al-Musnada. So that's another book which he wrote. That book is also published by Alam al-Kutub and printed by Izzuddin Ali al-Sayyid. And then in the next century, Alama Qastallani wrote, and thereafter Shaykh Waliuddin Alama Iraqi rahmallah, he wrote. So the name of his book is Al-Mustafad min Mubhamat al-Matni wal-Isnad. So the in the matan as well. We'll discuss about that shortly. Kamal ibn Abi Sharif made ishkal on Ibn Hajar. So in many times in the matan you get ja'a rajulun or sa'ala rajulun, etc. in the matan as well. But that doesn't have an impact on the authenticity of the narration. So he wrote this book. So this book here, it's published, the tahqiq was done by a person who is the slave of Allah. And, he got 3 names which are all the slave of Allah. So his name is Abdul Rahman, Abdul Rahim, Abdul Bar. How is that kind of a name? Abdul Rahman, Abdul Rahim, Abdul Bar. So he done this here to get his master's. It's printed in 3 volumes. It's in over 1,800 pages. In the ta'liqat, you can see that Sheikh Nuruddin Itr mentions with regards to it, that this year wa ahsanuha, it is the best of all books. Likewise, Jalaluddin al-Bulqini rahmallah, he wrote al-Ifham lima fil Bukhari min al-Ibham. So this year was published by a whole group of muhaqqiqin. They worked on it. It was printed by Dar an-Nawadir, and it's in about 774 pages. So this here is how Ibn Hajar rahmallah refers to it, and Kamal ibn Abi Sharif, like I told you, that he said that موضوع المبهمات أعم من كون الإبهام في الإسناد كما ذكر ومن كونه في المتن. That these books here, it does not all only cover having vague names in the sanad, it also covers in the matan, and therefore it doesn't mean that a narration or what comes in these books is weak, because it could be that the ibham is in the matan and therefore it does not impact the authenticity of the narration at all. So with regards to this here, Ibn Hajar rahmallah said, very quickly to go through these 2 lines, وَلَا يُقْبَلُ حَدِيثُ الْمُبْهَمْ مَا لَمْ يُسَمَّ. He's saying that the narration will not be accepted. So this here, it refers only and only when there is ibham in the sanad. Then in that case, you will take it malam yusamma, as long as the name is not taken. How can the names be taken if those who narrated from them have passed away? Like I explained to you, you look for a different sanad. Now the mafhum mukhalif of this year, you know Shafis. So Shafis, they like mafhum mukhalif. So the mafhum mukhalif of this year is that if the name is taken, then it can be accepted. However, this year will then have to be qualified with a default condition of the conditions of a sahih narration. So it doesn't mean that, okay, if the name is taken, then we can accept it. No, you have to look then, as long as he fulfills the default conditions. And that's what Allama al-Laqani says, وَفِي مَفْهُومِهِ تَفْصِيل وَهُوَ أَنَّهُ إِن سُمِّيَ وَوُجِدَتْ فِيهِ شَرَائِطُ الْقُبُولِ. So as long as you find these sharait of qubul, then qubila, then you can accept. Why is saying this here? So he says, لأن شرط قبول الخبر عدالة رواته. Because one of the very primary and basic conditions for accepting a narrator is that the rawi needs to be adil. So here in ours, it's ruwatihi. Some manuscripts of the reliable manuscript, they have the word rawihi, and therefore you will see some commentators saying that it's better if you should mention ruwatihi, but we already have ruwatihi. So he's saying that وَمَنْ أُبْهِمَ اسْمُهُ لَا يُعْرَفُ عَيْنُهُ. So you need to determine whether this person here was adil. But if you don't even know his name, then you don't even know him. So if you don't know him, you don't know his identity, فَكَيْفَ عَدَالَتُ, then how can you even know whether he will be adil or not? So Allama al-Laqani says, هَذَا عَجِيب وَالْإِسْتِفْهَامِ لِلتَّعَجُّبِ. He's saying that it's not a question here. They don't go answer him and go now say, you can see a question mark there, so you can say, okay, maybe we can name like this or like that. This here is istifham لِلتَّعَجُّبِ. Like how Allah Ta'ala says in the Quran, كَيْفَ تَكْفُرُونَ بِاللَّهِ. So this here is basically because we don't know the identity of a person, therefore we cannot accept this narration. You will have to make tawaqquf on it, and tawaqquf and mardud is of the same. That means you cannot practice upon it, especially when it contradicts other narrations. Inshallah, we'll continue from here next week. Until then, jazakumullah khairan. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.